Good afternoon. I'm Councillor Diane Donaldson, and I'll be chairing this hearing of Subcommittee B of the Licensing and Public Protection Committee of Birmingham City Council. Before we start, can you all please mute your microphones for the moment in order to improve the sound quality whilst I outline the procedure? Can you also please turn off your cameras with the exception of the committee members, unless you are the person speaking? This is to reduce bandwidth. Committee members will have their cameras switched on throughout the hearing. Could everyone attending today's meeting please put their mobile phones on silent and ensure they're situated in a room or environment which is free from distractions or any unnecessary noise emanating from radios, TVs, etc. Thank you for that. I'm speaking slowly and clearly so everyone can follow. It is vitally important, for I hope obvious reasons, that those attending the meeting and making representations are able to hear me and members of my subcommittee and officers. Any distractions brought to my attention could result in the meeting being suspended temporarily or to another date and time under the regulations for these types of meetings. I also confirm that this is a public meeting and is therefore being live streamed on the City Council's website in order that the general public can view it. I advise that this meeting will be webcast for live or subsequent broadcast via the Council's meeting YouTube site, details of which are in the agenda, and that members of the press public may record and take photographs except where there are confidential or exempt items. Members are reminded that they must declare all relevant pecuniary and non-pecuniary interests arising from any business to be discussed at this meeting. If a disclosable pecuniary interest is declared, a member must not speak or take part in that agenda item. Any declarations will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. I don't believe we have any apologies for today's hearing.
No, Chair.
Thank you, Katie. Can I welcome you to this hearing for an application in respect of the licence for AK Supermarket, 868 Washwood Heath Road, Birmingham, B8 2NG. I'll begin with some introductions. My name is Councillor Diane Donaldson and I'm chairing this meeting of the Licensing Subcommittee. With me are other members of the subcommittee, Councillors Mike Sharp and Adam Higgs. Also present in this meeting are the following officers: Licensing Officer David Kennedy.
Good afternoon, Chair.
Good afternoon. Committee Manager Katie Townsend.
Good afternoon, Chair.
Good afternoon. And Committee Lawyer Joanne Swampillai.
Good afternoon, Chair.
Good afternoon. Could I ask all parties to identify themselves, please? Firstly, the applicant, Christina McCulloch, BCC Licence Enforcement.
Good afternoon, Chair.
Good afternoon. Now those making representations, Mark Swallow, West Midlands Police.
Good afternoon, Chair.
And Paul Elson, Trading Standards.
Good afternoon, Chair. Paul Elson, Trading Standards.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the premises licensing holder, Jahangir Hussain. No, I don't believe he's...
Sorry, Mr. Hussain isn't present. I'm Rob Edge, Licence Leader, the agent acting on his behalf, Chair.
Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Edge. Could I ask if any persons making representations wish to withdraw their representations at this stage of the hearing?
No, Chair.
No, Chair.
Thank you, everyone. I will assume that all parties have read and understood the Licensing Committee's procedural rules sent out with the notice of today's hearing. Please note that given the nature of today's proceedings, I may at my discretion amend the procedural rules to reflect the fact that this meeting is taking place online, but wish to assure you that any such amendments will not impact on the parties' right to a fair hearing. We'll be using the chat function in Microsoft Teams to communicate. One of the icons on your toolbar is a speech bubble. Click the speech bubble to go into chat. If you do not have access to the chat function for any reason, please use the raise a hand function to indicate you wish to speak. That button is usually fourth from the right on the toolbar. You can also, of course, indicate verbally that you wish to speak at the appropriate time. Can you all confirm that you have access to the chat facility by typing your own name now? Officers will also type their job title. The meeting will not proceed until you have all done so.
Paul Elson from Trading Standards, Chair. Unfortunately, I've got a problem with my unit, but I will be making representations verbally, if that's okay.
That's fine, thank you. Thank you for your heads up. Okay, I believe that's everyone. Is that correct, Katie?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. Please keep this chat column open for the entire duration of the meeting in order that everyone can follow the messages being posted in the chat. If any participant has dialed in on an audio telephone rather than Microsoft Teams, please speak now to confirm that you can hear and be heard. I don't believe we have anyone dialing in today, but I'll move on. With the exception of subcommittee members, please keep your camera off unless you're the person speaking. If there are any problems with bandwidth, which cause difficulties with the sound, I may, in my discretion, ask everyone to turn their cameras off in order that the meeting can proceed with everyone able to hear and be heard. Does anyone wish to make any preliminary points at this stage? If so, please indicate that you wish to raise a point by typing speak into the chat function or using the raise a hand function now. No, nobody wishes to make any preliminary points, sir. Thank you. I'll now briefly outline the procedure we'll be following at today's hearing. Firstly, the Licensing Officer, David Kennedy, will present the report. Then the applicant will be asked to present their case. We're asking if this could be kept to approximately 20 minutes. Next, those making representations will be invited to make their case. Again, approximately 20 minutes will be allowed for this part of the hearing. Finally, the licensing holder will be invited to make their case. Again, approximately 20 minutes will be allowed for this part of the hearing. Finally, the license holder will be invited to make their case. Again, approximately 20 minutes will be allowed for this part of the hearing. Can ask all parties to speak as slowly and as clearly as they possibly can, because the officers are taking notes by hand for the minutes. And the meeting is also being live streamed on the City Council's website. If at any time it's somebody else's turn to speak, please mute your microphone and use a chat function to communicate if necessary. Please note that members of the subcommittee will be able to ask questions at any stage, but will try to do so at the conclusion of each presentation. Cross-examination by the applicant and those making representations will not be permitted unless the members consider it appropriate. Where questions are raised by members of the subcommittee or by those present, they must signify this using the chat facility set out on the right-hand side of the screen you are viewing this meeting on. The meeting manager will alert me if I do not notice messages in the chat. I will determine verbally or in writing on the chat facility the order in which questions are dealt with. So at any point in the meeting, if you wish to speak, please type the word speak into the chat function, and the meeting manager will ensure that we come to you at the appropriate moment. If at any point you cannot hear or having problems with your internet connection, please use the chat facility to alert the meeting manager. The chair will then ask the person speaking to repeat what they have just said. It is therefore important that you use the chat function as soon as you're unable to hear the person speaking. It may well be there's a problem caused by people still having their microphones or cameras on, which creates interference. So I remind everyone to please mute your microphones and turn your cameras off if you're not the person speaking. Could I point out that occasionally it may be necessary for the subcommittee to take legal advice. At my discretion, I may ask all parties to wait in this meeting whilst members and the relevant officers withdraw to take legal advice using a separate meeting within Microsoft Teams. We will then return to this meeting and continue. Please note that if any time the live stream being broadcast on the City Council's website fails, I will ask you all to mute your microphones and cameras and to stop speaking until the live stream is restored. If at any time this meeting goes into private session, the meeting manager will pause the live stream. Once the private part of the meeting is over, I will ask the meeting manager to confirm that the live stream has resumed before we continue. At the conclusion of the hearing, I will invite all parties to make a brief closing submission. Can I stress that no decision will be taken until all the evidence has been heard? At the decision-making stage, the members and the relevant officers will withdraw from this meeting in order to determine the decision. They will go into a separate Microsoft Teams meeting. In the event that the members need to clarify any point, you will be telephoned by the meeting manager. The members will then make their decision. You'll be notified of the decision of the subcommittee within 5 working days. So I hope that's reasonably straightforward. So with that, can I ask the licensing officer, David Kennedy, to present the report, please, as slowly and as clearly as you can, please.
Thank you, Chair. Birmingham City Council's licensing enforcement team applied on the 16th of February 2022 under Section 51 of the Licensing Act 2003 for a review of the premises licence granted to Jahangir Hussain for AK Supermarket 868 Washwood Heath Road, Birmingham B8 2NG. The purpose of the report before the committee today is to consider the review application, the representations received during the statutory consultation period, which ended on the 16th of March, and to determine the matter. Representations have been received from West Midlands Police and Trading Standards as responsible authorities, which are attached to Appendices 1 and 2 respectively. The review application is attached to Appendix 3. The premises licence holder's nominated representative has submitted supporting documents, which are attached to Appendix 4. The premises licence is attached to Appendix 5. It should be noted that the premises licence was surrendered by Jahangir Hussain on the 28th of March 2022 in advance of a separate hearing to consider assigning himself to become the designated premises supervisor at the premises. As there is provision under the Licensing Act 2003 for a licence to be reinstated within 28 days of it being surrendered, today's review hearing should proceed. Site location plans are attached to Appendix 6. When carrying out its licensing functions, a licensing authority must have regard to Birmingham City Council's statement of licensing policy and the guidance issued by the Secretary of State under Section 182 of the Act. The authority is also required to take such steps as it considers appropriate to promote the 4 licensing objectives. The options available to the committee today are to modify the conditions of the licence, exclude a licensable activity from the scope of the licence, suspend the licence for a period not exceeding 3 months, revoke the licence, or take no action. Where the authority takes a step to modify conditions or exclude a licensable activity, it may provide that the modification or exclusion is to have effect for only such period not exceeding 3 months as it may specify. Thank you, Chair.
You're on mute, Chair.
Thank you, Joanne. Now, would the applicant like to make their presentations now, please? Christine McCulloch.
You're on mute, Christina.
Sorry, is that working now? That's it. Hello, good afternoon. The premises licence was originally granted to this premises on the 30th of November 2021 for the supply of alcohol off premises between the hours of 8 AM and 10 PM 7 days a week. At the time when the licence was granted, there was not a DPS assigned to the licence. A DPS is required. It is a mandatory condition under the Licensing Act that for the supply of alcohol, there has to be a designated premises supervisor attached to the licence. So at the time that the application was submitted, we were advised that the DPS would be submitted at a later date. On the 19th of January this year, Licensing Enforcement received information that alcohol was being supplied at the premises whilst there was no DPS attached to the licence. From checking records, I could confirm that there wasn't a DPS. As a result of this, on the 2nd of February, Licensing Enforcement officers made a test purchase of alcohol. They visited the premises and there was a large amount of alcohol displayed, set out on the shelves, priced up with the intention of supply. The test purchase was made of a bottle of wine. That was returned to the offices. So then after that, on the 17th of February, I actually visited the premises. We'd still had no notification of a DPS for the licence. So I visited the premises and to advise that of the test purchase. I was accompanied by West Midlands Police. So we went in, we advised the shopkeeper, the person working behind the counter, of what had happened, and he contacted the licence holder who lives locally, and he joined us within about 15 minutes of us arriving at the premises. That was Jahangir Hussain. When Mr. Hussain arrived, we explained what had happened. Whilst we were there, we went through the conditions of the licence to establish the level of compliance that there was at the shop, albeit the alcohol shouldn't have been on display, the alcohol shouldn't have been supplied, but we still needed to know how they were complying with the conditions at what level. So when we went through the stuff with Mr. Hussain, it came to light that Mr. Hussain had actually completed his personal licence training course, but he hadn't yet been issued with his personal licence. So he had the qualification, but he hadn't got the licence. Now, this would have been fairly recent. Going through the conditions of the licence with Mr. Hussain, there seemed to be very little understanding on his part. He was not complying with any of the other conditions on the licence, and he didn't seem to grasp a lot of what was being said to him. We had to explain that there was no DPS. We had to explain what a DPS was. Now, this is a gentleman that has recently undertaken a training course and obtained a qualification. Mr. Hussain, during the visit, Mr. Hussain was very cooperative. He removed all the alcohol. Him and his staff removed all the alcohol immediately from sale. But that didn't take away from the fact that there had been a supply of alcohol when there was not a designated premises supervisor on the licence, which means that the supply of alcohol was not in accordance with the authorisation as required by the Act. There were pretty fundamental, pretty basic things that the premises weren't complying with. We had things like Challenge 25, which I would expect somebody that had undertaken a course recently, a qualification recently, would be able to comprehend this and understand what he should be doing. Challenge 25 is not a difficult process to follow. It is quite straightforward. If somebody doesn't look Challenge 25, you challenge them. There are certain forms of ID that you accept. There are refusals logs. You record your refusals. You have to prove that the only way that you can prove that you are complying with Challenge 25 is if you've got refusals, if you've actually got an up-to-date register to show that you are using the system and you've got evidence to back up that that system is in place and it's being used by all the staff. We had staff training. Now, when I went into the shop on the evening in question and I spoke to the gentleman behind the counter, it was obvious that there was no staff training. That gentleman did not understand any of the licensing requirements. He didn't understand what was required of him as a member of staff working in a licensed premises. So Mr. Hussain did obtain his personal licence shortly after the visit, and as a result he did, as you've just heard Mr. Kennedy say, apply to become the DPS. I felt that Mr. Hussain had very little understanding. Obviously didn't come across that he was conscientious about the running of his business, because if he had been conscientious, even if he hadn't got a DPS, he should have known these were pretty basic things that should have been in place ready for the licence. He was the person that had stocked the alcohol. He is the person that had bought the alcohol for the premises. He is the person, he lives very local. He told me that he has day-to-day contact, day-to-day visits at the business. He is involved in the business. He knew that the alcohol was on display. He knew that the alcohol was being sold, and he knew that he did not have a designated premises supervisor attached to the licence. It is with this in mind that I submitted the representation. I didn't feel that there was any other option, that we couldn't work with the business as such, because if you've got failings of this nature at the beginning, when somebody is newly qualified, when it's supposed to be fresh in their mind, how do we satisfy ourselves that the premises will be run in a legally a compliant compliant way in the future? So it's with this in mind that I submitted the representation, in that I don't have any confidence that the business can uphold, that Mr. Hussain can uphold the 4 licensing objectives. And I think, in all honesty, that the case speaks for itself, and that there is very little else that I can say in relation to the matter. And I think that would conclude my representation. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Are there any questions from members at this point?
No questions, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, councillors.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Can those making representations present their case now, please? Firstly, Mark Swallow from West Midlands Police.
Thank you very much, Chair. West Midlands Police support the representations made by Birmingham City Council Licensing Enforcement Team regarding AK Supermarket, 868 Watchwood Heath Road, Birmingham, B8 2NG, licence number 5452. The representation is supported under the Prevention of Crime and Disorder, Prevention of Children from Harm, the Prevention of Public Nuisance, and the Promotion of Public Safety licensing objectives. The evidence submitted by the licensing team clearly shows that this premises are supplying alcohol without there being in place at the premises a designated premises supervisor, and breaches of all of the operating conditions attached to the premises licence, which are there to ensure that the licensing objectives are promoted. So on the 9th of January, West Midlands Police became aware of a complaint made by a member of the public that AK Supermarket had been alleged to have sold alcohol and single cigarettes to a minor. Inquiries were made into the premises and it was discovered that there was no designated premises supervisor listed for the premises. This was confirmed by Birmingham City Council, who stated that the original application had stated that the proposed person for this role was undergoing training, and since that time, no DPS has been nominated for the premises. A test purchase was undertaken by the enforcement section of the local authority. This was an adult test purchase, and a bottle of wine was purchased from the premises. And as a result of this, on the 10th of February, personnel from both the police and the local authority attended the premises. In the shop, there was spirits, wine and beer displayed for sale on the left wall of the shop as you entered, and beers in a cooler on the right wall of the shop. There was one member of staff working, and Mr. Mohammed Malik. The premises licence holder for the premises, Jahangir Hussain, was contacted and attended the premises with a friend a short time later. He confirmed eventually that there was no designated premises supervisor for the premises. He couldn't produce any staff training records, but he said he'd told Malik what to do. He couldn't produce the refusals log for the premises, stating that it was at home. When questioned about the CCTV system, Hussain via his friend stated that the CCTV was on a recording loop of 7 days and then recorded over, not the 31 days as specified in the operating conditions of the premises licence. Hussain also stated that the short form of the premises licence, which was not on display in the shop, was at home. There was no notice in the shop requesting that customers respect neighbours, and when asked about pre-opening checks for the premises, Hussain didn't seem to understand what that meant. Those issues were pointed out to Hussain, and it was explained to him that he couldn't sell alcohol whilst there was no designated premises supervisor for the premises. Most of the alcohol was removed from the shelves and the rest was covered. Hussain stated that all the alcohol would be removed from the shelves the following morning and he would shut the shop for that night, which he in fact did. There was no alcohol or anything else in the storeroom of the premises. Aside from there being no DPS for the premises and alcohol being sold, it is alleged that alcohol and single cigarettes have been sold to children, and each of the operating conditions were breached on the day of the police and local authority visit. It would seem that these breaches have been taking place since the issue of the licence on the 2nd of December 2021. West Midlands Police have no confidence in the premises licence holder being able to promote the licensing objectives or abide by the conditions of his licence, as he's shown no regard to these during his stewardship of the premises. In fact, he has shown that he is completely unable or unwilling to abide by any duties placed upon him by the Licensing Act 2003, and it is believed that he would continue to operate in this way. The licence has been surrendered. It was surrendered just prior to the hearing in regard to the application by Mr. Hussain to become DPS for the premises. That was objected to by West Midlands Police. I gave evidence in that hearing based upon the issues that have been revealed here and the concerns that there would be with Mr. Hussain being both premises licence holder and DPS for the premises and having sole stewardship of these premises. The application for him to be DPS was refused last week, and I would ask that these licences be revoked. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. Move on to Paul Elson now from Trading Standards.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Paul Elson. I work for Birmingham Trading Standards. My role here today is to support my colleagues in the licensing section and express my serious concerns about the licence being held at this particular premises. I'll just give you a chronological order of events, what happened. Birmingham Trading Standards received information from our colleagues in licensing on the 17th of January 2022 that a member of public had raised concerns about the premises of AK Supermarket 868 Washwood Heath Road, and the allegation was that they were supplying alcohol and tobacco to persons under 18 years old. Now, I must say that is quite a common complaint about a lot of premises that we have. The complaint states that they witnessed the sale of 3 single cigarettes to 3 different schoolboys, along with a bottle of vodka. Clearly, if these allegations are true, it is a fundamental breach of the premises licence. However, what I am concerned about is most of the allegations that we tend to have tend to be with younger persons buying canned beer, Alco Pops, those sort of products. Very rarely indeed, and I've been doing this job 32 years, do we ever get an allegation that young persons buy strong liquor, i.e. vodka, whiskey, brandy, something like that. Those tend to be the reserve of the adults. So that is my first concern there. Equally is the allegation sale of single cigarettes. Again, when I started this job many years ago, it was quite common. It is getting very, very rare now to say that single cigarettes are being purchased. In fact, this is probably the only one I've had in the last year, I would have thought. The reason that's a problem is because the single cigarette trade not only induces people to smoking, which we all know the dangers of, it is also negates the provenance of that product. Where those products come from, they may come from a legitimate pack, they may, but equally they may not. They may come from illegitimate sources, illegitimate products. We don't know what's in the product. There's a lot of cases where illegitimate or illegal products are cut with various substances that aren't tobacco, and that may cause a problem, as well as the detrimental problem to health. As I say, both of these types of illegal sales have a dramatic negative effect and sometimes devastating effect on the health and welfare of persons under 18 years old, and equally profoundly disturbing the effect of the local community. I'm going to speak personally now. I'd have great problem with young persons roaming the street awash with alcohol inside them, particularly vodka, which is absorbed very quickly into the bloodstream. Okay. And quite clearly there are public dangers there. There are private dangers to people stepping in front of the cars. And the problem is that particular area is a very pedestriated area. It's a large pavement. It's a busy road, lots of people moving about most times of the day. It would cause a profound problem, and that's my belief. Getting on to the goals of compliance with the legislation, I believe that when the officers went back, Christine McCulloch went back on the 17th of February to do her inspection visit, none of the conditions appear to be complied with. Those fundamental conditions of CCTV, refusals log, challenge 25 are fundamental means of controlling and avoiding offences being committed and to ensure the premises are well run, that they can serve a local community positively and put them on a par with their competitors. If none of those basic conditions seems to be met, is there any point in giving them a license if they can't meet the fundamental points of the license? Okay, they're not particularly onerous. Every retailer has the same set of licensing objectives and more or less the same set of conditions on each of their license. I know they vary sometimes they don't, but they are not that onerous on the trader to enforce. If you go in and staff have no idea what the legislation says, and equally, as Christine McCulloch, my colleague, said, they actually spoke to the licensee who equally didn't appear to have any idea what was on the licence, then should that licence really be continued to be granted to that person? And equally concerning to trading standards is the supply of alcohol and tobacco to persons under 18 years old is a fundamental, I believe, exploitation of their innocence quite apart from the risks, the physical risks of the consumption of tobacco and alcohol by young persons. They are not adults. That's what the legislation is designed to do, is to restrict that supply chain. And if you can't do that, I'm afraid it's very sad indictment on the person who has the license. Now that's my belief and that's my case. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Are there any questions from members at this point?
No questions, thank you, Chair.
No, thanks, Chair.
Thank you, councillors. And the licence holder make their presentation of their case now, please. Mr. Rob Edge, who's the agent. I don't believe Mr. Hussain is in attendance today.
Thank you, Chair. Acting for the premises licence holder, I've given full regard to the representations made for the review. The licensing objectives set out in the Licensing Act 2003, the Council's Statement of Licensing Policy, and the guidance issued under the Home Office for the Section 182. The premises are run by Mr. Hussain. As a result of COVID and the business struggling, he decided to go down the route of adding alcohol to his sales in order to save the business. He fully understands the error in his judgment at not being fully prepared and the lack of due diligence. He now seeks the opportunity to put things right. He sincerely regrets these misdemeanours and wishes to apologise to all concerned for the inconvenience caused. I think it's very relevant to point out that in the two statements from Mr. Swallow and Mr. Elson, Mr. Swallow says he had been alleged to have sold alcohol and single cigarettes to a minor, and Mr. Elson says that a complaint states that that a complainant states that they witnessed the sale of single cigarettes to schoolboys along with a bottle of vodka. I'd like to point out that in section 912 of the guidance issued by the Home Office, I'll just read there 2 or 3 lines within that paragraph. It says, however, any responsible authority under the Licensing Act 2003 may make representations with regards to any of the licensing objectives if they have evidence to support such representations. I would put it that it is possible that alcohol was sold to minors. It's possible that cigarettes were sold to minors. It's also equally possible that a rival business has made a vexatious claim that those acts have taken place, and there is no evidence to suggest that either cigarettes or alcohol were sold to minors. And in actual fact, when the test purchase was made, it was an adult test purchase. So someone that certainly looked over 25 and purchased a bottle of wine, as was mentioned by Christina McCulloch. If there were the intention to make statements about sales of cigarettes or alcohol to underage people, then a test purchase should have been taken place with someone underage attempting to buy single cigarettes. So I would strongly refute the allegations of those, especially when there's no evidence to back them up. It also says in the section 182 guidance under section 1110 that where authorised persons have concerns and problems about identified premises, it is good practice for them to give licence holders early warning of their concerns and the need for improvement. and where possible, they should advise the licence or certificate holder of the steps they need to take address of their concerns. A failure by a holder to respond to such warnings is expected to lead to a decision to apply for a review. This wasn't the case, and Mr. Hussain openly admitted that he had not shown sufficient due diligence, but did demonstrate, as requested in the section 11 of the guidance, full cooperation with responsible authorities, and that he would have engaged even more so had other advice been given to him. I think that concludes for me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Rich. Are there any questions from members?
No questions, thank you, Chair.
No, thanks, Chair.
Thank you, councillors. So now, do those making representations wish to make a closing submission? And I request that each confirm what their recommendation is. Thank you. And in reverse order, so I'll go with Paul Elson, Trading Standard. So, yeah, Paul Elson, then Mark Swallow.
Thank you very much, Chair. I do take on board the criticisms from Mr. Edge. He's quite right. There wasn't a pre-enforcement visit done on that particular site. The reason for that is because my colleagues in licensing acted so promptly when they did the their test purchase. As regards running an underage sales exercise, they are extremely complex, believe me, especially with COVID and all the other restrictions that are placed on us by the Home Office guidelines. In fact, we only did one 2 weeks ago, I think, and that took at least 6 months to organise because you have to have the officers and there's lots of things you have to do. So I am aware of the criticism that Mr. Edge has said, and I do take that on board. But equally, I am still concerned that most of the complaints that we get, and most of them tend to be alleged complaints till it goes through to a court of law, is the fact that it mentions vodka. Most of them tend to mention, as I said, beer, alcopops, those sort of products. Saying vodka is a very unusual allegation. Okay. Yes, I'm quite aware it may come from other traders. I deal with a lot of complaints where one trader is informing on another trader. There aren't really that many other traders around Alum Rock area to do that. I know there's one over the road, but apart from the big supermarkets, there aren't that many other places actually selling alcohol. But I don't know. But what I would remind the committee of, that the license, the alcohol license that's given to members, given to traders rather, is a privilege and not a right. Okay, and it shouldn't really be up to enforcement authorities to tell retailers and traders who have a license what that license says. They should already know it. They've been granted it. He was granted the license on the 30th of November the previous year. So he had at least a month and a half to go through that license to see what it said. And if he didn't understand it, there was no problem in him picking up the phone, either speaking to my colleagues in licensing or myself or any other enforcement body. It isn't really our job to go around to tell people what they should do on their license. They should already know. They have the license. Okay, all we have to do is to ensure that there's a safe environment for both the public and for the traders. So that's my submission. Thank you, Chair.
And your recommendation?
Oh, sorry, I forgot that. My recommendation is the withdrawal of this licence.
Thank you, Mr. Elson.
Thank you very much.
Mark Swallow, West Midlands Police.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'll deal with the 2 points brought up by Mr. Edge. In relation to the initial allegation that brought this premises to the attention of the authorities, I invite you to view that with some scepticism. It is an allegation. It is obviously witnessed by a member of the public. However, there is no support to that directly. What there is support in the fact that the licensing objectives and the operating conditions on the license have not been followed or supported. So I would say that adds some weight to that allegation, but I still invite you to view it with some scepticism because it is an allegation. In relation to the issue of advice prior to enforcement, yes, enforcement was the option taken, but the rationale for that and the reasoning behind that was because on the visit to ascertain the situation, the position of what was going on, the situation is so bad in those premises that advice is inappropriate. Every operating condition was being breached when the visit took place. I'm afraid that has gone beyond advice, and as such, enforcement is the only option that is available. Mrs. Sain has shown he's completely unsuitable to be a premises licence holder. The operating conditions are there to ensure that the licensing objectives are promoted. Every one of them has been breached. This is by somebody who holds a personal licence, is qualified to be a personal licence holder. So they should have some knowledge of the licensing objectives and how to promote them and what is on the licence and what their roles are and the roles of other people. He seems not to have this. That cannot be acceptable. Even though this licence has been surrendered, if this application is not supported, then that licence can be transferred in the 28-day period, and the premises licence holder could still have significant control over those premises, if not total. It's therefore important that this licence is revoked. This is a matter of trust. Trust that the licensing objectives will be promoted by Mr. Hussain. He's already been trusted once by the issue of the licence. He's completely and 100% abused that trust by breaching all of the operating conditions. I would therefore ask that this licence be revoked.
Thank you, Mark. Now move on to the applicant. Does the applicant wish to make a closing submission?
Chair,
Yes.
Christina McCulloch has to speak. Sorry.
Christina McCulloch, yes.
Yes, I do wish to make a closing speech. Thank you. If I can address the points firstly that Mr. Edge has raised. Section 182 is guidance. It is followed. It is taken into regard every day, but it is guidance. It is not compulsory. It's there to fit into certain scenarios as to how is the best way to work. We can't always follow the guidance. In this particular case, whilst I appreciate that the allegation was in relation to the sale of alcohol to minors, as my colleague Mr. Elson has said, the time delay was just too long, and I have dealt with underage sales before, and I understand the difficulties. The option, once you receive a complaint like this, obviously we have to assess everything on a different basis. It's all individual, and it was decided, I made the decision that it would be better if the sale was made by an adult, not a child. As Mr. Elson said, we would have had a lengthy delay. We'd got the, I appreciate that there's no evidence of the underage as Mr. Edges raised. I haven't referred to that. That for me, the allegation that came in was just a trigger point. It was just something that sparked, that needed attention. I didn't actually take any action on that, and I haven't mentioned it in any depth in the representation in relation to that. But as I say, I would just say section 182 does give guidance, and it is guidance. It is not compulsory. I feel that the premises, at my visit to the premises, there was total disregard for the Licensing Act. This was clearly, it was clearly demonstrated that the licence holder has a total lack of understanding of the requirements of the Act that are placed upon him as a licence holder, and then as he put himself forward as the designated premises supervisor. It was more concerning in my eyes because the licence holder is a newly qualified personal licence holder. Therefore, he should have come away from that course, looked at his licence when he got back, which is what you would do. You would look and you would check whilst it's fresh that you're doing everything that you can. So that obviously didn't happen. No conditions were complied with on the licence. There was no DPS. There was allegations of underage sales, and you've heard the concerns of the police and trading standards, in particular the risks of for the protection of children from harm. I personally did not feel when I met the licence holder that I had any confidence in him. I don't have any confidence that he will be able to uphold the 4 licensing objectives. And I understand and I appreciate that the premises licence is currently surrendered. But I would ask that this licence be revoked on the grounds that if the premises is allowed to stay surrendered, it can be picked up. It can be picked up by another party. And Mr. Hussain, this is his business. And before the alcohol was there, as you heard Mr. Edge say, he bought alcohol in to try and save his business due to the circumstances that we've all been going through. This was his business before. It was a retail business, slightly different, but it was a retail business. He will still have involvement in that business if this licence is allowed to be picked up by a third party. So it is with that in mind that I would ask committee please to consider revoking this premises licence. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, does the premises licence holder or agent wish to make a closing submission?
I will, if I may, please, Chair. I'll keep it short and really go through bullet points. Again, Mr. Hussain sincerely regrets the events that have taken place and wishes to apologise to those concerned. He did say that none of his actions were carried out with malice. They were shortcomings of his due diligence and nothing else. I do come back again. I appreciate that Christina McCulloch submitted the review and did not make any mention of underage sales in there. I think we need to disregard the allegations because, as was said and admitted by the police, they are allegations. There is no evidence of those. The fact that Mr. Hussain has surrendered the premises licence is that he said to me yesterday that he obviously now understands that he is not the right person to run a licensed premises as it is, but that because the business has struggled so badly, he's now going to be left with no option but to sell the business, and that the only way he would make a good business deal on that is to sell it with a premises licence and transfer the licence to whoever becomes the new owner. So it would be feasible, and with legal anyway, that
Sorry, Rob, I lost you then.
the license.
You just go back to the last sentence.
Sorry, yeah, that he would wish to sell the business with a premises licence in place, and it could be conditioned that he is not to enter or to play any part in the business whatsoever, and that would give him the ability to sell the business, transfer the license to a new license holder, and not have any part in it whatsoever. And I would agree that probably is the best way forward. So I think that concludes my final summary. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rob. I will now ask all parties to leave the Microsoft Teams meeting, and the members, the committee lawyer and the committee manager will go into the private session while the subcommittee makes its decision. You'll be notified of the decision of the subcommittee within 5 working days. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.